Poet E.E. Cummings concludes his poem, "Pity This Busy Monster, Man Unkind," in these words: "We doctors know a hopeless case if, listen, there's a hell of a good universe next door. Let's go." If you know a hell of a good universe next door, please let me know, and don't point me to the Webb Observatory in outer space. I know about that one a little bit. However, unless you have a Harry Potter diploma in the world of wizardry, we're pretty well stuck in this universe. We are in trouble, but we are not hopeless, not yet. Not as long as we join a conspiracy for life. The most immediate threat to our universe is the United States Supreme Court, SCOTUS, and most particularly its repeal of the Roe v. Wade decision on abortion rights. I knew it was coming, but it still hit me hard right in the guts. And why? Not only because I believe in a woman's agency over her own body, her moral agency, but because I have spent a good long time trying to defend reproductive justice. It was difficult to secure an abortion in 1969, as it will be now in many of the states of our union. The bad old days have become the bad new days. I was minister of the Unitarian Church of Ithaca at the time. In 1969, when my friend and colleague Dave Evans from First Baptist Church called me. Abortion was essentially illegal in New York State. Problem pregnancies were rampant. The rich could afford them, the poor could not. Nationally, from 200,000 to 1.2 illegal abortions were performed each year, according to the Guttmacher Institute. Medical complications and even death were often the result. The Reverend Howard Moody in New York City created the Clergy Consultation Service on abortion. Dave asked if I would be interested in setting up a similar group in Ithaca. I was. Moody came to Ithaca. We met with OB/GYN doctors. We had our theological and ethical discussions. We met with a well-known Cornell Law School professor to look at our potential legal jeopardy in what we were about to do. And of course, we secured the permission of our church boards, because what we were doing was a kind of civil disobedience. An answering service was set up. We even had referrals from liberal nuns and priests. The goals of our upstate clergy consultation service on problem pregnancy were two. One, to provide all options counseling for women, and two, to advocate for change in New York's abortion laws. We developed a disciplined counseling process. We counseled only at our church offices. Women had to have a note from a doctor indicating that they were indeed pregnant. And they filled out a counseling form, including talking about the reason for wanting an abortion. Our caseload grew quickly. Over the next year, I counseled over 50 women. One week, I met with 17 women, and occasionally with men and their lives. Although we always spent some time with the woman alone, so she would not feel pressure from a man. Would she qualify for a legal therapeutic abortion in New York State? Only if the life of the women were threatened, and that note had to be signed by no less than 3 doctors. If she did not qualify, we referred her to a pre-screened situation where abortion was safe and legal, laws were liberal, and doctors willing to take a degree of risk. The women who appeared in my office were a microcosm of American society and social problems. A teenage girl whose Catholic parents would probably disown her if they knew what she was about to do. A financially challenged couple in their 40s who already had 6 children and could not afford more. They were already on the razor's edge of their family economy. There were 2 med students, pre-med students, who said if they had a child now, it might derail one, if not both, of their careers. They wanted to have children later on when they were established. And a Native American woman who failed to get a New York State abortion and left my office threatening suicide. In every case, the decision these women made was a tough one, painstakingly taken. The women had abortions in England, Japan, Puerto Rico, the state of Maryland, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, among other places. There were 2 legal New York State abortions out of 6 attempts to secure one. One woman we referred died. Some were poor, many were poor, but we were unable to provide very much financial assistance. Upon their return, we advised them to get a physical examination by their doctor, discuss birth control with that doctor, and report their experience to us. Not too many did, but we did find out something about them. From the beginning, we combined our counseling with legislative advocacy at the New York State Legislature. Now, hang on for this one. My Republican Assemblywoman from Ithaca, Connie Cook, carried the bill to reform New York State's abortion law, a Republican. Nelson Rockefeller, Republican, was governor, and both chambers of the legislature were in Republican hands. The debate on the assembly floor was bitter and long. The bill passed finally when Auburn's Democratic Assemblyman, George Michaels, whose son I knew as a Cornell activist, changed his vote in the middle of the voting for it to pass. In the next election, he was swept from office, and I've often, constantly regretted not doing more in his campaign. But both Connie Cook and George Michaels, to me, were profiles in courage. It had been heartbreaking to work with women, desperate women who were forced to almost furtively and almost in a criminal way seek out what they needed to have done with their bodies. If the Texas anti-abortion law were in effect then, I would probably be in jail. You could visit me there. And the person who outed me would be $10,000 richer. That's the way it is in Texas today. And so with a great sense of relief, we disbanded in June of 1970, thinking that the legislature had rendered our work unnecessary. And our relief turned to real hope when the Supreme Court in 1973 passed the Roe v. Wade decision. Obviously, we took our victory laps a bit too soon. In Rochester, I joined a local citizens review panel for research in a mifepristone and misoprostol test, better known to those of us who can't pronounce all these fancy names as the abortion pill, RU486, a procedure used in well over half of abortions today, and perhaps one hope we have for the future. Our group met with University of Rochester pre-med students. I debated a pro-life couple who brought forth all their slides of presumably aborted fetuses. And we discussed ethical questions with OBGYN students and staff at the local hospital, one of the local hospitals. I vividly recall debating this issue with an inner city doctor whose work I much admired. He was asked during the course of our debate what he would do if his 13-year-old daughter had been raped and needed an abortion. He said he would make her carry the fetus to term. From that response, I knew I had still more work to do. At one of many demonstrations, a young woman from the anti-abortion crowd, when she discovered that I was a minister, shouted at me, "Preacher, you're going to hell." But being a born Universalist, that did not bother me one bit. I received some nasty mail, no real threats, no death threats, at least not yet. But our group did have one very good conversation with Christians for Life, an anti-abortion group, at the local Friends Meeting House, the Claremont Dialogue. And 5 of us from each group, pro-life and pro-choice, though I hate those terms, met together for a morning and discovered the humanity of each other, even though we never could agree. But as a born Universalist, what else could I do but honor their views? With an anti-abortion friend with whom I had marched against the war in Vietnam and for the war on poverty, I served on an ecumenical commission. We were charged with finding some kind of consensus on abortion. We failed. A champion of the so-called consistent life ethic, she was the founder of the Susan B. Anthony List, an anti-abortion group, even though we know that Susan Anthony, there was no evidence that she was against abortion. Fast forward to 2019, when Interfaith Impact of New York State joined with other groups in coalition and passed the Reproductive Health Act and the Comprehensive Contraceptive Coverage Act in New York State. New York already allowed for Medicaid abortions. Roe is now embedded in this state, not in the criminal code, but in the health code where it belongs. Contraceptives are more generally available. And this legislation recognizes the moral agency of a woman, that reproductive matters, decisions are a matter of moral reflection, not legal mandate. But Friday, June 24th, marked the date. The Supreme Court of the United States, SCOTUS, overthrew Roe and a related case, Casey, which affirmed Roe but placed an undue burden possibility on women. If they faced an undue burden, they could get an abortion after so many weeks. But it basically upheld Roe. And so we have gone back to the bad old days, and it's almost worse in a way because we have known a taste of reproductive justice for almost 50 years in this country, and now we're going back. The leaked draft from Justice Alito is now reality. And the state can place restrictions on abortion. Each state has its own way of doing it. So 50 states all dealing with this issue. So that Dobbs decision of the Supreme Court set off a firestorm, of which this sermon is part. Though hardly a lawyer, I find flaws in the arguments of Justice Alito and Associate Justice Clarence Thomas, both now called politicians in robes. Many times Alito mentions that abortion is never cited in the Constitution, and therefore there is no right to abortion. He neglects to mention that family, marriage, rights of the fetus are also never mentioned in the Constitution. As a constitutional originalist, He believes we must hew to the text and what the authors meant at the time, neglecting to note that slaves in those days were counted as only 3/5 of a person. They were not made citizens until 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. The founders were not without flaws. Alito also neglects the real-world consequences of what he and the other justices have wrought, affecting some 33 million women in states which either have rejected abortion totally or are about to. We've been plunged into a states' right chaos, an impossible patchwork of laws. If you are a woman in Oklahoma, forget it. No right to abortion, no justification at all. If you are so wise as to live in New York State, you live in a locale of relative reproductive justice. If you are involved in vitro fertilization, if you have a miscarriage, if you are an OBGYN, you have to be wary. Many of these proposed laws, most of them are simply draconian. Will women have to justify leaving a state? Are they taking a cruise or getting an abortion? How will the authorities find out? They're trying to. Suspicious mail may have to be opened to guard against transporting abortion pills through the mail. Will telemedicine be monitored? Will Google track your whereabouts? We forget contraception was not protected until 1965 in the Griswold decision in Connecticut. And while Alito suggests his anti-privacy rationale does not apply beyond this case, Clarence Thomas sees it differently, and he would have the court investigate, re-litigate same-sex activity, same-sex marriage, and contraceptives themselves. Mitch McConnell and Mike Pence toy with the idea of a national ban on abortion, which would nullify New York State. We are entering a dystopian world, reminiscent of Margaret Atwood's classic Handmaid's Tale, where reproductive justice is not available and where authoritarian rule is the order of the day. I only wish the governor of Texas, along with many other politicians, would read The Handmaid's Tale. They would see what they are doing is leading up to its iteration. Happily, New York clinics are gearing up for what promises to be a flood of women from other states. We are a reasonably free and responsible state, I think. Our legislature has approved the Equality Amendment, part of which defends the right to privacy and would protect abortion as a constitutional right. It has been passed by this session of the legislature, needs to be passed by the 2023 session, and then ratified in a statewide popular referendum. Stay tuned. Anti-choice legislation is inherently racist and classist. Rich women will always find a way. Dobbs will only drive abortion underground with these so-called trigger laws in states, which include a disproportionate number of Hispanics, Blacks, the young, and the poor. The old adage may be tragically accurate. The rich get richer, and the poor get babies. Back alley and botched abortions will return to haunt us because women will always seek an abortion when they feel they need one, legal or illegal, safe or unsafe. Unwanted children will be born to those who cannot afford to raise them. Consider the case of the rape of a 10-year-old girl in Ohio. She could not get an abortion in Ohio because of its draconian laws, and she was sent to Indiana for the abortion, 10 years old, already a victim of this decision. As usual, it is the marginalized who will suffer the most. Real world impact should be a part of judicial arguments. Otherwise, we'll have another case of an abstract theory murdered by a brutal gang of facts, to paraphrase the French philosopher La Rochefoucauld. As one of my ministerial colleagues says, speaking to anti-abortion senators, "So, Mr. Senator, if I am 13 years old and pregnant, please don't tell me theories about when life begins. If I am carrying a grossly deformed fetus, do not talk to me of legal subtleties. If I am pregnant with a potential child whom I could not adequately care for, do not cite the sixth commandment." I only wish those who oppose abortion so vehemently could have been with me in 1969 and 1970. I only wish they could have looked into the eyes of these women, these desperate women who came for help. I only wish they could have been there to tell them that because some religious people don't believe in abortion, they may not have one. But they weren't, and they aren't. They are out there picketing Planned Parenthood, which helps prevent unwanted pregnancies and therefore reduces the abortion rate. They're out there preaching from pulpits, proclaiming a Christian nationalism, that their moral values should become the law of the land, no matter what other moral values are. They are protesting embryonic stem research with its life-giving promise. Justice Alito claims that legalized abortion is not embedded in the history of the nation. Where has he been? Apparently, he doesn't listen to NPR or read Slate, for example, where an historian of reproductive issues notes that Ben Franklin, in one of his luminous books, a reasonably historical figure, detailed the how-to of abortion for women in that time. This historian wrote that to colonial Americans, termination was as normal as the ABCs and the 1, 2, 3s. The Guttmacher Institute traces that history as well. Alito, one of 6 Roman Catholic justices on the Supreme Court, also does not note that abortion was not a mortal sin until the Pope declared it so in 1869. And those 6 Catholic justices were appointed by 4 out of 5 presidents who lost the popular vote in our skewed electoral system. Some are confirmed by senators who represent 44 million fewer people than the other side. You know which parties I'm talking about. So the president and Mitch McConnell, hypocrite, advertising, pushing a tyranny of the minority. Paradoxically, a strong majority of Roman Catholics supported Roe v. Wade. It is white evangelicals who are the most anti-abortion. Strange, because they tout Jesus as their savior, despite the fact that Jesus said nothing about abortion. Look it up. As Catholic scholar John Courtney Murray put it so wisely many years ago, our people, meaning Catholics, have to learn how to live in such a pluralistic society and not expect that every moral teaching will find its perfect echo in legislation. In sum, we might say that the Supreme Court's Dobbs decision is the revenge of Donald Trump. So I leave you with Gilbert's theses. Human life is sacred, but each faith has its own view of what that means. One synagogue in Florida, for example, is suing the state on its anti-abortion laws because in Judaism, life begins with the first breath the baby takes. Moral agency is a religious value. I affirm a woman's right to choose not despite my religion, but because of it. If people can claim religious freedom by refusing to be vaccinated against the pandemic that has claimed over a million Americans, then surely a woman can claim bodily autonomy. As one woman says, why would conservatives who clamor to get government off our backs want to force it into our wombs? Sadly, the very politicians who celebrate the Dobbs decisions are the very ones who deny the support families need to flourish. The child tax credit, paid family leave, and so on. You see almost a direct correlation between those who are anti-abortion and those who vote against these bills. They are pro-life until a child is born, when their interest seems to wane. Human life is a continuum. When does life begin is really the wrong question. As one recalcitrant priest put it, if human life begins at conception, why is not the feast of the incarnation celebrating the birth of Jesus not celebrated on March 25th? Interesting question. I find no moral equivalency between a week-old embryo and a 35-year-old woman. And I envy those politicians and judges who are so absolutely right about their position. They apparently render irrelevant the age-old discussion among philosophers, theologians, everyone, on the whole question of the beginning of human life. As Whitehead once said, seek simplicity and distrust it. Reproductive health, then, is a human right. Safe abortion is an integral part of that reproductive health. The forced birth or mandatory motherhood is entirely indefensible. Shall I compel a woman to nourish this potential life when within her, every nerve in her body cries out against it? Ignorance is not bliss. Age-appropriate sexuality education yields moral agency and healthy sexual behaviors and practice. I would suggest that the justices and the politicians take our course in sexuality education, OWL, O-W-L. They would benefit greatly from it. American exceptionalism, in this case, is a cause for shame, not pride. As other nations expand reproductive freedom, Catholic nations like Argentina, Italy, Mexico, Ecuador, and Ireland expand reproductive freedom and justice. We are the global outliers going the wrong way. Well, these are troubling times, and it is easy to become discouraged. Trump and Trumpism we find to be a clear and present danger to our nation's survival. And it has been said that anger is one letter short of danger. And so it seems in the wake of the Dobbs decision. On the other hand, we have Marge Piercy's poem, A Just Anger. As you can tell, I am quite angry. I hope it is a just anger. My rage is a cloud of flame, which I walk seeking justice like a precipice. A good anger swallowed clots the blood to slime. A good anger acted upon is beautiful as lightning and swift with power. The upcoming months then, up through the November election, test our capacity to follow the better angels of our nature. As a political observer, I'm a little pessimistic, but as one who seeks reproductive justice, I am forever hopeful. I choose to join a conspiracy for life life that leads not to the Handmaid's Tale scenario, but to Martin Luther King's beloved community, where somebodyness includes women. New York State was the site of the first Women's Rights Convention, and we have a responsibility to that heritage. Once more, we lead the way in providing justice, reproductive justice for women. We provide a safe haven. We fund those who will support women coming from other states to this one and other states. And we also hopefully challenge the tyranny of the minority with which we are faced. Finally, consider the case of the Texas OBGYN, Alan Braid, who explained he had performed an abortion in violation of that outrageous Texas law, essentially prohibiting abortion. He has already been sued, and he was glad of it. That was his intention, to challenge that law. Dr. Braid is 76 years old, but he isn't finished with his work. I am 85 years old, and I am not finished either. More important, neither are we. Defending reproductive justice is sacred work, and we should be proud to do it. Amen. So be it.